Welcome to our publishing panel today. My name is Catherine Alexander, one of the careers consultants here at the Careers Service, and my colleague Diane Caldwell and Jane Ansell are helping me today with the chat. They're also careers consultants at the service. A very, very warm welcome to all of our speakers who have generously given their time today. We've got 4 great panellists from a range of publishing organisations and a range of perspectives on the industry who are going to be talking about their experiences working in the publishing industry. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what they say about their careers, the similarities, the differences, and their tips and advice that they give. No matter where you are in your career planning, I'm really hoping that you'll find this helpful today. We have Anna Lawrence, who is Managing Editor of Academic Publications at the Royal Geographical Society. Jean Jollands, who's Section Editor at Bauer Media, which is magazine publishing. Jane Evans, Senior Commissioning Editor at Jessica Kingsley Publishers, and Lucy Beresford-Knox, Head of Translation Rights at Penguin Random House. So a real breadth of experience in the room today. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at their biographies in the e-handout that we circulated. We're going to start today with each speaker just talking a little bit about what a typical day looks like, and then we'll move on into some questions from me and from there into the questions at the end. So we're just going to go around as it looks on my screen. So we'll start with you, Anna, just sort of 3 to 5 minutes on what a typical day looks like.
Thank you. So yes, as Catherine said, I work for the Royal Geographical Society, which is a learned society. So I come from sort of that sphere of academic publishing. And in that role, I oversee 4 academic peer-reviewed journals and a book series. So I basically oversee the submission process and publication process for all of the articles that come in to us. And so a typical day is an awful lot of responding to email queries, supporting editors, supporting peer reviewers, supporting authors, and processing. I do a lot of sort of administrative processing of papers that come into us, making sure they're all in good order, and then selecting peer reviewers for some of them, and also doing a sort of initial desk reject round. So my role sort of sits between administrative support and also sort of more engaged academic engagement with the papers themselves in terms of selecting which ones we move forward with. And then at the other end of the process, supporting authors and editors in which papers get through to publication. So doing the sort of proofreading of the papers, supporting authors in making sure that they are submitting all of the correct documents and so forth, but also supporting editors in a more strategic overview of where the journals are going. So I have sort of frequent meetings with all of our different editorial teams made up of academics around the world, and trying to encourage them and motivate them to sort of define where the journals are going, help them to write editorials and so forth. So it's an extremely varied job. I get to do a lot of sort of helping to write editorials and such like as well as the more sort of looking at doing a lot of statistical analysis on the sort of papers that we are getting through, and making sure that everything is running smoothly on a day-to-day basis. So it's an extremely varied role and a lot of working with people.
Okay, thank you very much. Next up, Lucy.
Yes, so I work in trade publishing for Penguin Random House, and I run the translation rights department, which is a part of trade publishing that is often slightly or just not so well known about. And my job in kind of the basis of it is selling the right to translate the books that we publish into different languages around the world. Any book, the number of kind of big authors, Charlie Mackesy, Jamie Oliver on the illustrated side, or J.K. Rowling, Lee Child, they could be published in upwards of 30, 40 languages, and all of them require an initial license from the initial publisher or author. And it's my job to pitch our books to international publishers to try and get them to take a publishing license to translate that book internationally. My job involves a real variety, partly of reading books that come into Penguin Random House as submissions to look at whether or not they have international potential, whether it's likely that they will be licensed to international publishers. And then it has the second part is a sales part of the job, in which the books that we do acquire that we then want to sell internationally, I'm out pitching to international publishers. That's either on email, sharing material, or it's out at book fairs or at on sales trips to different countries, connecting with publishers internationally to get our books out there. So it's a mixture of an international sales job and an editorial job. A lot of it is about connecting, about communicating with people, about finding the best book for the best publisher, and also about how to pitch a book effectively. And then a fair bit of negotiation as well, both externally and sometimes internally in an acquisitions meeting, where you've got to fight for why you think a book is worth acquiring or not worth acquiring.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. It's nice to hear about how the books actually end up on the shelves where we come to buy them in the end. Jean next.
Hi, so I work for Bauer Media UK, and in the real life content team. So that's the team that covers our magazines: Grazia, Take a Break, That's Life, Bella, Yours magazine. And when I start my day, I would start off by checking the memo, which is the editors telling us what stories they want us to chase. So if, for example, the Sun newspaper has a story about a woman who's, say, tummy tuck has gone wrong, they might say, Jean, can you chase her? So I have to try and track her down, get on Facebook, try and get an address so we can make an offer to pay her for her story. So once we've done that in the morning, then I'll go on to editing stories. And so the writers put their stories in a basket, and I will edit the story, make sure that it's got a decent, I would say, a juicy headline, a sexy headline, make sure there's no legal issues on it, make sure it's to word count. Sometimes people will write 200 words over, but I have to put it through bang on word count. If there's any legal issues, for example, if we're making claims that I'm a bit unsure about, then I'll get on the phone to our lawyers and make sure that the story is legally sound, so we don't get sued, or we don't go up in front of IPSO, which is the kind of governing body. And then on top of editing other people's stories, I have to write my own stories as well. So often in the afternoon, I will listen to interviews that I've done that can be about a range of topics, and I'll write them up. So it's quite a varied job. But back in the old days, they would send us out on the road. We'd go to people's houses, Shetland Islands, Newcastle. We'd go all over the place. There was money to spend in journalism. Now you are mostly sitting down and interviewing people on the phone. Now we go in the office 2 days a week, obviously post-COVID. Back in the day, we'd be in 5 days a week. Now it's 2 days a week in the office and then 3 days at home. But yeah, it's a varied job in the actual content of which we do, which could be anything from, you know, a hero, a pet who saved someone's life, to someone who survived domestic violence. It's the complete gamut.
Okay, thank you very much. Really, really varied. And Jane.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Senior Commissioning Editor at Jessica Kingsley Publishers. So we're a specialist publisher for books for professionals and for the general reader, all focused around social justice. So my specific remit is books on the topics of mental health and LGBTQ, and I oversee around 20 titles each year. So part of my role will involve going out and finding those books, which can happen in various ways. So we have proposals and submissions that come to us directly that I will review, or it might be that we come up with an idea in-house for a book that we feel will really fill a gap and could be commercially successful. And then we'll go out and try and find a specific author who can write on that topic, who might have lived experience of a particular topic or professional or academic expertise in that area. And I'll then oversee those books throughout their kind of lifetime. So that involves supporting the authors to deliver the manuscript, reviewing the manuscript and giving editorial feedback when it comes in, and then liaising with other departments as well. So the marketing department, the design department, sales department, to bring that book out to market with a great cover design and ensuring it can be really successful.
Okay. Wow, you're all so enthusiastic about what you do, but really varied in what you do. I think I know the answer to the first question I have for you, but I'll ask it anyway. What do you really enjoy about your different roles? What gives you job satisfaction in your jobs? Just chip in. We'll start with Jean.
Hi. I did touch on it. I love the variety of my job. Literally, one day will be. I've been speaking to her for a number of years, but one of the victims of the post office scandal was a woman who was wrongly jailed when she was 8 weeks pregnant because they basically said she had her hands in the till, completely innocent. 1 minute you're talking to someone like that, the next you're talking to someone whose husband ran off with their sister. And then you're talking to someone whose dog sort of sniffed out their cancer. It's such a varied role, and I love that. I'm also a chatterbox. I love people. I love talking to people, and I love hearing their stories. I absolutely love that. And I love about journalism, not so much when you're in a magazine, but if you're on a newspaper, it's just a sense that you're in the know. And if something big happens, if the Prime Minister resigns, if there's a massive story, you're kind of in the thick of it all and finding out about it, and you've got people running around and it's all exciting. I just love the access that journalism gives you. When I was younger, a bit more superficial, it was all about the celebs that you could talk to, but in reality, it's just the access you can get to talk to just a wide range of people. I love that. I love my colleagues that I work with. I would say that, wouldn't I? But we are on a really lovely team, very down to earth gang of people. And yeah, I really genuinely feel privileged to do the job that I do.
Oh, thank you. And what about you, Jane?
So I'd say the variety of the role as well, I really enjoy, and I think it's just a real privilege to work with authors, to be honest, and to be able to kind of shape their manuscripts with them and help them to kind of put their expertise into a book and get out to as many readers as possible. And at JKP, we're a mission-driven publisher, and that is very rewarding because we often get messages from readers telling us how helpful the books have been to them in their lives, and that's a great feeling.
Anna?
I'd say it's mostly sort of the satisfaction of being able to support people through the whole process, sort of having gone through the process of trying to publish academic papers myself and knowing how complicated it can sometimes be and how fraught the peer review system can be in terms of getting feedback that might be quite difficult to handle. So being able to sort of marshal people through that and make sure that they're having as sort of smooth and positive and constructive an experience as possible is absolutely a privilege, and then being able to have more of a sort of substantive role in helping shape their work, more so with some papers and books than others, but that's a real joy.
Okay, so far it's been all about the people and the variety, but what about you, Lucy?
To be honest, I'm not sure I'm going to deviate that much, actually. For me, it's really, I love that it matters that I read, that, you know, I've always loved to read. I've always loved to read novels. I've always loved to read non-fiction. And I like that I do a job where it matters. If I read a thing and I have an opinion about it, that is actually part of my job to do that, whether that's in an acquisitions meeting talking about whether a book should be published, or at a book fair where I always kind of pinch myself that I sit down at a book fair and I speak to a publisher from, say, Germany or Italy, and I get to say to that person, I've read this book, it's really good, this is why you should love it. And then that person read it and say, oh, that book you told me about, I really love it, I want to publish it. There's something about a little bit being in the room early doors and working with an author, seeing what an author comes up with, and then being able, it mattering that I've read it and I tell somebody about it, and that being worthwhile. So I think that there's something lovely about talking to people about books that I just really enjoy. certainly more so than reading emails, which I also have to do a lot of, but the best bit is always the bit when you talk to people about books.
Yeah, I think every job there ever was, there's a lot of emails. Yeah, for sure. Now you all come from very, very different angles on the industry. Before you thought about publishing, or when you're at the stage that our students are at the moment, did you know which angle on publishing you wanted to go into, or did that kind of happen because an opportunity came up and this is where you ended up? You know, did you have a plan for the direction of your career?
I'll jump in and say I absolutely didn't. I knew I wanted to work in publishing, and I knew, even though as I was leaving university, I wasn't sure that I ever wanted to read another book ever again, I kind of very soon kind of changed my mind and realised that actually working with books would be fantastic. And I initially thought the only job I really knew about in publishing was a job as an editor. But actually, I kind of looked around and thought, those jobs don't come up that often, and what else is there? And so I went into a rights job kind of not really knowing exactly what rights involved or quite how broad it could be. And I thought maybe this is somewhere where I'll, move on from and move to a different part of the publishing business. As it was, I was lucky. I kind of found myself in a job that I really liked, where it was really varied. And so I ended up kind of staying within the rights sphere. I've done lots of different jobs around that part of the business, but it wasn't ever necessarily a plan that I would be a rights professional. I thought something within publishing, and I kind of got lucky to kind of jump in and find a role that developed into something that I really wanted it to be.
Thank you.
I didn't have a plan whatsoever, to be honest. I spent 2 years at the university, partying, studying, and by the time I left uni, I was just exhausted. I was knackered. I just needed a break, to be honest. So I spent, I think, about a month in bed after I graduated. Then I ended up working for Merton Council in the council tax office. And then when I got it together, I applied to do a journalist qualification, an MA, and got rejected. And at that point, to be honest, I was like up and down all over the place. And then I happened to meet someone who knew the editor of a black newspaper called The Voice, and I managed to get work experience. So actually, that was the old school way of, it's a case of who you know, to be honest. And that was my first opportunity. But I know we're going to get to this question, but if I did it all again, I would have a plan from now. But when I was in my third year, to be honest, it was just about finals and studying, and I didn't have a proper thought out plan. And I would definitely recommend that, although it's not the be all and end all in the sense of, you're at university, enjoy yourself, you've got to focus on finals, do have an eye out to what it is you might want to do. You can always change any direction, but it is good to plan, I think.
Thank you.
I also did not have a plan, particularly. My plan changed. I did a PhD and then thought about going into academia, applied to some things, and then sort of realised that might not be the path for me. And then this job just sort of came up, and so I kind of fell into it. I really wasn't thinking about publishing at all, and my sort of bit of the publishing, because I sit within a learned society, it doesn't really feel like I'm in the publishing world. It feels like I'm in the learned society world, but because I'm the only person within our society who really deals with the publications side of it, and so it's nice being able to work with a team who do completely different things. But yes, I didn't have a plan. I still don't have a plan. I don't particularly know if I still want to sort of work in publishing in the future, or whether I'll sort of go back into academia and there. But this role is very nice because you kind of can keep your foot in the door, basically. It's sort of an in between the world of academia and the world of publishing, which is sort of exactly what I wanted.
For me, I attended an event very similar to this actually in my second year of university and came away thinking book publishing, that's definitely what I want to do, which was, you know, great to have that kind of plan. But then I was quite open-minded about whether it was going to be academic publishing or more commercial publishing, fiction, non-fiction. And I think if you're interested in getting into book publishing, I would encourage that kind of openness and flexibility, especially for your first role. It's much easier to move around once you're in, I think. And it was my kind of open-mindedness to different types of publishers that made me apply for an editorial assistant role at Jessica Kingsley Publishers, which is, you know, quite a specialist publisher focused on professional publications. And I really hit lucky because I've been there for over a decade now. So it shows that sometimes you don't know what you're going to love.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you very much. Picking up on something that Lucy mentioned earlier, that most students consider editorial because that's the job that you've heard of. Obviously you're talking about translation rights, but are there any other departments in publishing that students don't usually consider, but maybe you would recommend as a foot in the door once to start your career in publishing?
I think actually kind of similarly to what Jane was saying, there's kind of taking any role that is an entry-level role in publishing gives you an additional grounding that helps you. It's a business where knowing a bit about how a lot of things work can really, really help you out. And there is, particularly at entry level and kind of one step up level, quite a lot of opportunity for finding the right thing for you. So I wouldn't say there's necessarily one job that grounds you for everything, but taking a job in rights, in sales, sometimes where there's kind of a big, where it kind of, again, it matters that you read and that you have an opinion on a book, which can help you if you then choose to move into an editorial role or if you choose to move into a rights role. Similarly, publicity can give you a different way into the business. Those ones really kind of give you an idea of the process from beginning to end of how a book works. Then there's also the more kind of contractual legal area as well, which can be really interesting. Sometimes slightly harder to shift into a more creative part of the business, I would say. But I think many of the entry-level roles, it's worth not kind of writing off something that doesn't say editorial assistant, because there are plenty of other ways in that actually might suit you in a different way or might actually lead you into something else.
Definitely, I think that's something I've seen in my career from some of my colleagues. So I've had colleagues who have started off as editorial assistants. So they've started off by being the secretarial support on a news desk or on a features desk, you know, from typing letters to answering phone calls to replying to reader queries. And they've moved them up the system and now journalists and very well respected journalists. So there is that movement. And also what Jane said, which really hit a nerve with me, is that I had colleagues who were also interested in features and women's stories, but went off and did they would work on things like Angling Times or Engineering Today just to get their foot in the door. God knows whether they were interested in angling, but if that's what it took, they do what it takes to get in there some way. So yeah, it's I think Lucy said it as well, just been broad-minded and looking for opportunities. But there is a lot of movement, and you'll be surprised that people do come at you know, in the business from different areas.
And actually more and more, just adding to that, more and more, I think publishers and employers in general are really interested in what's different that you can bring into the business. Certainly in my team, I'm always more interested to see somebody that's got something slightly different on their CV, that brings something different, something fresh. Publishing isn't known for being, you know, necessarily the fastest moving industry. We've got a kind of slightly more traditional reputation, and actually people that are bringing something in from either a different industry or a different part of the business can be really, really useful. Sorry, I jumped in there. It's definitely your turn, Anna.
Jane, go for it.
I was just going to add that I think there can be a lot of focus on editorial when people are first coming to the idea of working in publishing, and sometimes that comes from not having a completely full understanding of what the editorial roles look like as well. sometimes there's an assumption that it's, you know, reading all day or doing hands-on editing all day. Actually, there's a lot of project management involved. There's a lot of admin involved, and it often appeals to quite a lot of introverts. And I think we are, in general, a department of introverts, but it is a lot of people management. It's a lot of communication, pitching and acquisitions meetings, things like that. So it's worth doing your research into what all the departments look like, I think, and really trying to understand them.
Yeah, and I have a sort of quite specific other, you know, experience of having done a PhD and then moving in. But I know a lot of people, especially in the, you know, the larger academic presses and Wiley and Sage and so forth, there are very specific teams, for example, you know, peer review support teams or production teams and so forth, that are ostensibly made up of people who have done PhDs in all sorts of different topics, and then are there to sort of support lots of different journals. And so that's a sort of a different way that you can get into it, but that's quite specific.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Great insights there. Jane started to talk about the different skills that are needed within the publishing industry. I see quite a few students, especially in the early stages of thinking about publishing, who just love books. They love books, they love reading, and they want a career that involves those things. But when you're looking for entry-level roles, what are the other key skills other than a love of books that you look for in, or you think the publishing industry looks for at entry level?
So I can kick off. I think that communication skills are really, really important. That's both verbal and written communication skills. So copywriting is a great skill to have, but also just being able to communicate clearly verbally as well. I think, as well as having that love of books, really understanding that it is a business, that, you know, we're trying to make money. That's what we have to think about, and just sort of shifting how you think about books when you're, you know, in a bookshop, you're reading a book. Think about what it is that leads someone to buy it, how a publisher might have chosen to present it, things like that. And organizational skills is another key one, I'd say, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Time management for me would be the sort of biggest thing, because as I say, it's, you know, very varied, but there are an awful lot of different pools in your time, and a lot of relationship management with lots of different sort of players throughout the process. And so being able to juggle lots of things and manage your own time well would be important.
Yeah, I think also the commercial mindset is a really important one, because once it's all very well to love a book and want everybody to read it, but if it's not going to make any money, sadly, majority of publishers aren't going to publish it. So there's an element of business mindedness that you need in a publishing role, and also I think creativity and creative thinking. And I think there's always, particularly in an industry that wants to innovate and wants to be publishing people who are saying things that are new or sharing new stories, knowing, like, having a kind of an open mind on what might work and what might work in the market, how the market might move forwards, but also how you might promote a book. What are the kind of things that might make a book work? What are the new things that we should be trying to bring into publishing and make into a book? So there's definitely kind of creative thinking, in addition to what you've all already said.
I would add to that, obviously in the area that I work, you just need to be non-judgmental, and you need to be able to talk to anyone from any walk of life. You might be interviewing someone who has done something that you don't actually approve of or think is ridiculous or anything, and you just have to be able to talk to that person and give them that respect. That's really important. Listening skills, active listening skills, is super important in journalism, because you're there to get a story, and that's really important. The commercial side of it, when I started off, it wasn't anything you'd ever think about, and now you have to think about what's got potential, what kind of stories will go viral. You need to be really savvy on social media about what people want to know about. So those skills have become even more important, I think, and definitely time management is the part of my job that I hate the most, the part that I really struggle with. The whole point is deadlines, and you have to produce copy, decent copy, on time, and it is always a struggle. when I was at Cambridge, literally my whole life, I did a history degree, and my whole life was like 2 o'clock, you know, panic attacks because my essay's not been written. I've got like 7 hours to write this essay before it goes into, you know, for some reason I just suddenly thought of a historian, Dr. Steinberg at Trinity Hall, I think he was. I always remember him, like, I was so pressed for time that in the end, I literally did the first part of my essay, put blank sheets in the middle, and then just delivered it pretending it was a mistake by accident. And that was student life for me. So being a journalist, I've had to completely turn that around. So anyone who's got a great sense of a deadline and sticking to a deadline would be really, will do really well. I'd almost say that sticking to a deadline is as important, or maybe more important, than being a great writer, to be honest.
Okay, thank you very, very much. Over the last decade or so, digital and more recently AI has started to have an impact on almost all careers across the board, publishing included. How has this changed the industry and maybe the skill set that candidates are going to need going forward? Is AI having an impact as much as we think it might?
It hasn't impacted my actual role day to day at the moment, but there are all these great bods in our business who are looking into how it's going to change the way journalists do things. And I know that some of my colleagues are starting to maybe put in prompts for suggestions of headlines, for example. I know in the industry as a whole, some journalists are putting in like, you know, if it's a 700-word piece, can you cut this down to 400? These things are all happening. But the skills that you need is, I guess the thing is, people are very scared about AI. A lot of people are scared. It's like the machines are taking over. But the key thing is that you need to know, as a journalist now, you need to know how to use AI, because that is coming where it's going to be much more an important part of our role. And I think also we need journalists who are better at fact checking, because we know that AI is not perfect. We know about hallucinations where content is created that is not correct. So we're going to need journalists who have a real keen eye for detail, who are brilliant at fact checking, journalists who are very legally sound and can look out for legal issues, because there are a lot of issues about copyright, for example, on AI. Who does that content belong to when it's been generated through AI? So I think also you need journalists who are savvy enough to know the correct prompts to put into AI so you get the right answers that you're looking for. So it is changing the industry in the sense that you need to be more savvy, you need an eye for detail. And I think one of the big things that you'll see is that although AI is great at doing little nibs or newsy type stuff, the big investigative, deeper journalism is going to come to the fore, because that is the human. You need humans for that. So I think we're going to be looking at journalists who have the skills to do those big investigative stories. But I keep being told by people that we must remember that AI can only do so much, and the human element, the emotional element, the empathy that I would have to show to, for example, a rape victim talking about their story, AI can't do that. So you'll always need journalists, but we are going to have to be more savvy about using these opportunities.
Just think it's a huge question. I mean, there's so many unanswered questions at the moment about how AI is going to affect any industry. I think it's definitely going to affect trade publishing for sure, in how we use it. It can be used in so many different ways, but I think it will become part of the way that we work as we go forwards. But I don't think it will be replacing. I think people have said things about AI in terms of publishing in the same way that they said things about ebooks when ebooks were first new and exciting, and then that was, you know, oh, doom and gloom for all print publishing. And it simply isn't the case, because people want to read stuff that other people have created, and I don't believe that AI will be can do all of that, nor do I think anybody wants for it to. But I do think that it will change the way that we work, and we need to be savvy about it, and we need to learn about it, and we need to embrace it and embrace how we can use it to push the industry forwards, as opposed to fear it and assume that it's going to take over, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think having that curiosity about it and thinking about how it can potentially provide opportunities, how it may be able to, speed up processes, but, not take over the creative work that we do that's so important. I think, yeah, asking questions about it and being open and willing to think about it is a good skill to have. We have someone in our team who knows a lot about AI, and it's made them a real asset to the team at the moment. We can ask her lots of questions. So yeah, if you have an interest in it, that can be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's raising all sorts of interesting questions in the sort of academic publishing world, because obviously sort of the reliability and veracity of data that's being produced and such is very important there, and we don't necessarily know the authors that are submitting papers to us, and so kind of being able to initially try and see papers that might be either partly or completely AI generated, which has been a problem sort of over the last few months. That's certainly something that is an ever evolving sort of process, so we're always trying to keep up with it. There's very little that we can sort of do and to catch it, in terms of you can't use AI to catch AI in that respect, but the big sort of academic publishers are starting to develop different tools, again, to be a tool to assist human editors in being able to actually process and sort of do those initial checks on the papers to make sure that we are sort of accepting things from real authors that have real data behind them. It's a really interesting question.
Yeah, thank you very much. As you know, students often consider postgraduate courses, and you can do a postgraduate course in almost anything, including publishing. Do you think a postgraduate course in something like editorial, digital skills, or even data science, maybe in some areas, do you think that would be an asset, would make you more competitive in getting into publishing? Or do you think just a bulk of work experience and build up work experience would be enough?
I'd say I certainly don't think it's necessary. I think that it can be, publishing MA, for example, can be a great way to learn more about the industry and to get some hands-on experience, make some contacts. But I don't think it necessarily makes you more appealing when kind of considering applications. I think it's about how you show the skills that you have and the experiences, and I think that can be gathered from something like a publishing MA, but it can also be experiences you've had at university. It could be external work that you've done. There's lots of ways of showing those skills that we've talked about that are really important.
Yeah, I agree.
Sorry,
you go ahead, Jean.
No, Lucy, you go ahead.
Thank you. I just to echo a lot of that. Actually, I think you can get a lot from a publishing MA. So I would not say anything against them, because they're and in fact MAs that kind of give you more specific skills, as well as you were mentioning the kind of data science, editorial kind of stuff. All of that can really build your skills and make you a very appealing candidate. But I don't think it's the only way that you get those skills. Actually, there's a huge amount of work experience and literally, as you said, Jane, the experiences that you might have got from jobs that you've done that perhaps aren't even connected to publishing, that show the same skills that you would need in the industry. So they are very helpful to have, but I don't think they're necessary.
My viewpoint is perhaps a bit not necessarily following the party line on this, so my business might say differently. This is from personal experience. Back in the day, and I was one of those people, I got rejected when I first applied for City University to do a journalism MA, and I got into journalism through work experience. And back in the day, you could do that, and you could do that a lot, and you still can do it. But in journalism, it's a very strange landscape, because after the Leveson inquiry and all the scandal about phone hacking, the knowledge of journalists on to be legally sound has become much more important. And people want to know, editors want to know that if you have interviewed someone, you have taken down, maybe by shorthand, maybe through taping it, you've taken down the correct information. They want you to make sure that you're doing things in a legally sound way. And I can't stress enough, if I'd done my time again, I would have done my NCTJ, which is the National Council for the Training of Journalists. I would have done it straight after graduating. As it was, I had to do it bits and bits over the years. And there was a whole load of us oldies at work who didn't do it that way, and we've had to go back and do it. And there's always been that insecurity at the back of our heads, oh, what if we'd done that? Maybe we'd, as it turns out, we learned what we knew on the job. We know what our colleagues had who had the NCTJ straight away. We know what they had, but I just think it means you'll be legally sound, and I just think it gives you that confidence. And to be honest, when I go through job applications, I've been involved in recruitment for the last sort of year and a bit. If I see that, I do think, oh great, I know that these people will be trained to a certain standard. That's not to say if you don't have it, but you've got a really good fantastic covering letter, or you've done a really, we often give a task for job applicants to do. It's our way of sort of leveling the field. So it's not just about qualifications. We'll give a task, and if someone writes a really great piece and hasn't had much of work experience, they can still get their way in. But from my own personal experience and from experience with my colleagues, I would say if you're interested in journalism, and if you can do it, and I know they do distance learning courses now so that people can work and study, if you can do your NCTJ, I would really highly recommend it. And I think it give you a really good foot in the door, especially I would say more for newspapers than magazines.
Anyone else have anything to say about postgraduate courses? Okay, now we obviously have a very female panel in front of us today. I don't know how indicative this is of the industry as a whole. Would you say that publishing is a diverse work environment? And by that, I mean in all aspects of diversity, from gender, ethnicity, disability. And if not, are there any efforts being made to diversify?
I would say that there's definitely more work to be done in this area. I think it's something that certainly in book publishing, it's being talked about much more now than it was a few years ago. And there are efforts happening to make it more diverse. At Hachette, which is the larger company that Jessica Kingsley Publishers sits underneath, we have a new traineeship that's just started again this year. That actively seeks applicants from Black, Asian, minority, ethnic backgrounds, from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, and particularly men from both of those groups as well, because I think there do tend to be more women in publishing at the moment. We've also got lots of employee networks now at Hachette that focus on different identities and really help to advocate for them within the industry, because I think it's one thing getting people in through the door, but you've also got to retain them and ensure that they're happy in their roles as well. And there's some great work being done around regional diversity as well. Book publishing in particular tends to be very London-centric at the moment. We've just opened national offices at Hachette. So we have offices in Edinburgh, where I'm based, and Bristol, Manchester, Newcastle, and Sheffield as well. And we're really growing those to help diversify the people that are coming into the industry.
I jump in here. It's such a hard one, because when I started off, which was when I first went to mainstream journalism, I should say, so around the year 2000, I went to work on a national newspaper, and apart from one other Black woman on the third floor, it was the Daily Express on the third floor, the other Black people I saw would always be the security guards, the cleaners at the end of the night. It was such a different landscape. Now, we've just from a visual point of view, I know that has definitely changed, but there is so much more to do, and that again, that is on ethnic grounds, that could be on disability. The gender one in publishing is more not necessarily the numbers, but in terms of who's getting paid and the gender pay gap. But there's loads more to do. Bauer, and especially our HR team, do do a significant amount. They are trying to reach out to networks which we haven't used traditionally in the past. As I spoke about, there are these, when we shortlist people, we will give them a task, and that task will be the defining element, not where you've come from or your background, but how good were you at that task. And if you're great, you're great. It doesn't matter where you come from. There's also the fact that people are being trained now so that they're not, you know, the kind of anti-bias training. But it's a really hard, there's no easy way, because I remember this at Cambridge as well. It's scary. People talk about woke and anti-woke and all this, but one thing that would always scare me is if I got a job tomorrow and someone says, oh, well, you know why she got the job, you know. And I feel that there's those overtones sometimes in some of those things, that now people sort of question people's positions and stuff. So it's always that balance. But the media that I am in now is different from the one that I started off in. But yeah, there's a hell of a lot to be done.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of work that is being done, which is really cheering, and it's really similarly to you at Jane at PRH, we have a number of networks which really, the aim is once you recruit people in, and I think we have a really open recruitment process, which is really pleasing. But what we, I think, aren't quite so good at, and what we're trying to get better at, is making sure that publishing is a really welcoming environment for people from a variety of different backgrounds, not just that we are appointing people on the basis of talent, which I believe we are, but I think making sure that the environment that people are working in feels welcoming to everybody. And I think that is work that we're working really, really hard on. And I would say I don't think you're ever quite there, and we're working hard, and I think that work really needs to continue, because publishing isn't as diverse as it should be. I think publishing needs to be as diverse as the country. It needs to be as diverse as the people that it is publishing for, and we certainly aren't that yet. But I know that there is a huge amount of will for that to be the case, and a lot of work going on. I would say on the gender issue, I actually feel very proud to work in an industry where there are a lot of women at the top who are being given that power, and I think that is really pleasing. And although we still have a gender pay gap, and we also have actually not enough men coming into entry-level roles, there is something really great about having a lot of powerful women leading big companies, and so I think that is a reason to be hopeful as well.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add really is that there are different sort of professional bodies as well that represent people working in publishing. So for me, there's the Association of Learned and Professional Society Publishers, I think it's called, which sort of run different working groups and support networks and so forth, some explicitly around themes of diversity and inclusion and so forth. So there are other sort of networks beyond the ones that I work in, that you can draw on, and that are actively trying to work to diversify the sector.
Okay, thank you. Talking of networking, is publishing an industry where networking is really important, so that you keep abreast of trends in publishing, what's going on with other publishing houses? Do you all network across the board? Or would it be useful to network across the board?
It is really useful. Building a network remains really important, and it's not always everybody's forte, particularly if you sit with a slightly more introverted personality. Sometimes the kind of building a network at what you might think of as a traditional publishing party isn't always the way it happens, which is pleasing, I think. But I think building a network, knowing people in the industry, not because you need to know somebody to get something, but more because the more you know about an industry, the more you understand about what's going on and where the industry might be going. If you're looking for new jobs, if you understand what sort of publishing is going on in this publishing house, you're more likely to understand whether or not that's the right place for you to be applying. And just knowing the landscape. And you get that by building a network. But I think the best thing about publishing is that there's a lot of people, there's a new intake of entry level kind of regularly, and people want to connect, and there's a lot of people that want to connect and talk about, we all have books in common in a way. So there's a kind of easy way in. And I think we're getting a lot better now at helping bring people into our networks as well, to make sure that new joiners to the industry can start making their own connections. I think it's a really useful skill to build, even if it isn't something that comes naturally to you.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think what book are you reading right now is always the go-to question at a publishing networking party. It's something that everyone can relate to. It's very helpful. But yeah, I think having a network like that can really be a source of support as well. And including when you're first applying for jobs as well, if you can find other people who are interested in getting into publishing, there can be a lot of rejection. It's a hard industry to break into, so knowing other people who are going through that as well can be helpful.
My idea of what networking means has completely changed. Like in the 80s and the 90s, it was really like a hard sell, and you push your. I remember like chasing Piers Morgan down the road, asking for a job in the Mirror, because didn't get anywhere. It was really kind of forceful. And as I've got older, I've understood networking just means just learning about other people and almost putting the focus on the people that you're talking to. So what are they doing? And what, we're having a genuine interest in people is now what I see as networking in your industry. Just having a genuine interest, not going with an agenda or hoping to get something off them, but just having good, decent conversations. And you said, what book are you reading? Nice, decent conversations. Is it more important? I mean, I've never got a job through networking, but then I have no small talk. I don't do small talk. So I find these kind of things really awkward. But if you are very personable, maybe it's useful. But yeah, just to meet other people in your industry, maybe at the same level as you as well.
Yeah, I'd also say social media is very useful from my experience, especially sort of Twitter and getting your name out there and that sort of thing, and just being able to recognize sort of other names, and also to see opportunities that come up when people are posting about them, sharing them, etc. That's where I've sort of seen a lot of the opportunities that I pursued. And in fact, my current job was because I had that sort of informal network active. So I'd say that don't underestimate that for sure.
Great, thank you. We hear from various student surveys that get done that work-life balance is quite important. Well, it's obviously important to everybody, but it's important to students who are considering different careers, thinking about work-life balance and mental health and that kind of thing. Do you have any views on the working life in publishing and whether it's a healthy one?
I think there's a generation gap a bit, because the younger people, hopefully none of them, they can't be on this call. The younger people at my work seem to clock off dead on time, okay, and they're very protective of their work-life balance, so they will clock off. I'm from a time when you didn't clock off. Even if you'd finished your work, you didn't clock off on time. You wanted to be seen to hang around a bit longer, and obviously it's to do with your other commitments as well. So I'm a mum of 2 kids, and I am really aware of the fact that I don't personally believe that I have a good work-life balance. My life is very driven by my work, but I have colleagues who have a much better balance. So I think maybe now there's more awareness of mental health. I think now companies are more supportive of that work-life balance, and I guess down to the individual now to claw that back. But I know people who will work all hours, and like I say, I do feel that younger people now are much more protective of their mental health, and they will speak up, and they will be more protective of it. But I do think there's a generation gap.
Okay, thank you.
I think there's a real mix, to be honest. I think I've heard of examples where publishing can be brilliant for work-life balance. They can be flexible hours, quite open to part-time working, working from home, things like that. There's quite a lot of flexibility that is possible there. But I think there are also examples where, burnout is something that's been talked about a lot more in publishing now. And it's an industry where people tend to be really passionate about what they're doing. And there's a danger in that, you can take on too much because, you love what you do. So I think it is important to kind of have personal boundaries and take care of yourself in the industry.
Can I just add, Catherine, that especially, sorry, just because of what Jane said, post-COVID as well, a lot of people are hybrid working and working from home. And the thing about working from home is, although it's convenient, you don't get the commute, you can tend to keep working after your actual official time to clock off. So that has added, I think, to a bit of a blurring of lines as well. So something that could be actually quite positive has actually encouraged some sectors to actually put more hours in.
Yeah. Anna, have you got anything to add to that one?
Perhaps speaking probably as one of the younger generation, I'm definitely quite protective of my work hours, and I feel like that's been entirely possible for me. Also, I realise that I don't work in a sort of commercial sector, so learned societies or charities, and so I don't have that kind of pressure, which I imagine possibly might add to difficult sort of work-life balance situations potentially.
Okay.
So
yeah, thank you. Lucy seems to be frozen at the moment, so I am assuming that she is sorting all that out. I think actually we are going to move to the student questions now. So as we said earlier, if you do have a question, if you could pop it in the Slido, that would be lovely. Oh, we have a question in there, a question from Lucy. Do you also work with books that get translated into English from a foreign language, or is that a different kind of department?
It's mostly a different department. Mostly we work, the books that get translated from a different language into English is handled by our editors on a particular translated fiction list. That said, it is part of my job to know what's going on in what the literary landscape of another country is. So if there's a book at the moment, there's been a huge rise in fiction being translated into English from East Asia, in particular Japan and Korea, and that it has been really interesting for me to stay on top of what's going on there in order that I can feed that back into how I'm pitching out to international customers. So although I'm not involved in acquiring, that is a job that sits within my company, just with and it's normally an editor from a translated fiction list.
Okay, thank you very much. There's a question that quite a few people are interested in here. Most of you have said that you have you had work experience, or you would value it as recruiters. How did you go about getting that experience when you were starting out?
So I can say that I had, I think, 2 to 3 weeks of work experience at a publisher's in between my second and third year of university. I think at the time, work experience was something that was being more regularly advertised by publishers, usually unpaid for a few weeks. I think my sense is it's a little bit trickier to get that kind of work experience now, which is in some ways a good thing, given I don't think people should be doing that kind of unpaid work, but it is a shame because it's it's great to have that hands-on experience. But I would say that any work experience you can get in related fields as well can really help. Things like working in a bookshop or even just having office admin experience can be great things to draw on.
I explained earlier, I literally got my work experience by accidentally meeting someone who happened to know the editor of the Voice newspaper. I'm not sure I would have been able to get in at that time without that. But there are lots of opportunities in terms of getting useful work experience, as Jane said. Bauer have what they do is that different departments, if say for example Grazia need work experience, they'll put it on someone who can do work experience. They'll put that on the careers website, and then anyone who wants to sort of apply for that can put their name and their details on, and I can put a link afterwards. But there are less. You used to hear much more about these internships and work experiences. You don't hear as much about them now. But I would say also, as well as getting relevant experience, to always approach any public, if I'm talking about journalism now, approach any kind of magazine or newspaper publishers with actual ideas that you could develop for them, because journalists are not lazy, but they love people who save them time. So if you have a brilliant idea, pitch that idea. So if you pitch an idea and it comes off, then that's a chance for you to get in there to make that contact and then get work experience. I think the old-fashioned way, perhaps, of can I come for 3 weeks or can I come for 5 weeks? I think you're almost better off. I've got this brilliant story for Grazia. I've got this brilliant story for Vogue. Would you want that, and pitch it as a professional? And I think sometimes that's the best way to try and approach these things.
I think work experience is a little bit thorny in my opinion, because I think I don't agree with the idea that you should have to have worked for free or worked for really low wages in order just to get your foot in the door. And I think that's really something that is kind of going now to an extent, because it's more about trying to develop talent and seeing where that comes from, which does actually make it harder, because you can't just try and call up somebody and say, let me come and work for you for free, which is no longer really done. That said, any experience that you can get with anywhere. So there are quite often in publishing, there are scouting agencies and there are literary agencies who quite often need somebody on a short-term basis, either to read through slush submissions or to schedule meetings for book fairs in a scouting agency, or reading stuff quickly and just sending a report back so that people can report back to their publishers. And they can quite often be short-term, short contracts, maybe a few months, but just by doing that you gain a small network of people. If you do an impressive job, people are recommending people all over the place. I regularly, if I interview somebody and they're not right for a particular job, I would always feed that back. If somebody else said to me, oh, we're looking for somebody just for a couple of months to do whatever job it is, do you know of anybody? And so if you've impressed in a short-term contract, you can that can really help kickstart. So don't be afraid to ask for something, to go for something that might be short-term but could lead to something more.
Thank you very much. The next question is kind of linked to that. It's what sort of activities would you recommend to build the skills employers want to see prior to getting work experience or that first offer of employment? We have covered sort of the admin and the slush reading, as you said, slush pile reading. But are there any other activities that you might recommend?
I think Anna touched on it before about the importance of social media, especially in journalism now. And if I was starting out now, for example, and if I knew the certain market of journalism that I want to go into, I would start a blog talking about some of those topics that I would want to cover eventually in my career. I think if you have a strong social media presence now, employers will look at it, and you can show evidence of your writing. I mean, it's a great in a way that you can now show evidence of your writing and evidence of your skills without having even got your foot in the door. So anyone who's thinking of becoming a journalist, I think having a good social media presence, having a blog, you know, doing video, doing vlogs, anything you can do where you're showing your creativity and you've got that you can show to employers and talk about that. And if it's related to their market, I think that will get their interest as well.
I think there are some great ways to get experience while you're at university as well. Things like working on newspapers, if you've got student radio, that kind of thing. I don't know if the maze still exists. But
yes.
Something that, yeah. That's something that I did while I was at university, and that was something I could talk about in my applications and interviews. So yeah, I think there are lots of opportunities while you're a student too.
Thank you. Right, the next question is again a very popular one. Lots of people have upticked this one, and the answer might well be come to see a careers consultant. How can I learn and improve through the application process? It's tricky getting rejections without any feedback, and I'd love to know how to improve my CV and cover letter. Other than the career service, are there any ways that you can get that feedback?
I do feel quite strongly, because with covering letters, if you're going to work, again, if you're going to work for a magazine or a newspaper, you must be aware of their style, and sometimes covering letters can be quite dry, and you've got to, I think, stand out, inject some personality, inject some life into your covering letter so that you stand out. without being provocative, because I've seen covering letters where people will say, you know, I don't know if they're trying to get attention, but they'll say something like, oh, you know, the magazine's crap, but I can make it better. That will not get you friends or influence people. You need to pitch it at the right tone, but you need to show some life. You know, we're talking about the sort of cheating husbands and boob jobs gone wrong, so we don't want like a really drony covering letter. And the same to the CV, have loads of life to it. And I think a lot of places now, well, I know that we do, if you ask for feedback, we will give you feedback as well on your application. And just, you know, people, what we do as well, we have like screening questions, so that will get you to the next stage. And in those screening questions, sometimes we'll ask about what you think about a specific publication that you're applying for, or a sister publication. If you know that you're applying for a job, you need to know that publication inside out, left, right, centre. You need to know it back to front. And in your application letter, rather than almost just focusing on what you are, what you've done, focus on how what you've done can fulfill a need that publisher has. So be kind of forward thinking about fulfilling their needs. So it's kind of twisting it around a bit. You're like, you know, I see you always do stuff on blah blah blah, well, I've got experience of, you know, relate it back to what they offer. And again, I can't say enough that if I saw a covering letter where in that covering letter the person spoke about themselves, but also said, you know, I've got 3 great ideas for you about these topics, immediately I think, right, that's a person who's thinking beyond and what we actually do. And I think it's about fulfilling needs in that sense.
We often see applications that for kind of that almost feel like they are aimed at any entry-level job or any entry-level job in any publishing house. And I think, although I'm aware that a lot of people that are applying for entry-level jobs in publishing are probably applying to loads and loads of different places, it really does make a difference if you think about, if you tailor it. And we all know that there are plenty of publishing houses that perhaps our new hires might want to work in. But if I see an application letter that tells me why they want to work at Penguin Random House in the rights department, that's exciting to me, because that says you understand what we publish, you understand the sorts of books we publish, you love them yourself, and this is the energy that you can bring to a job. And it surprises me how many applications I see that launch straight into this is why I'm great, which we want to hear as well, but make sure that it's tailored to the publishing house, the sort of books that you might be interested in, or the sort of publication that you're applying to, and make sure that you've tailored it to how your experience fits to that. That's the biggest mistake I see people who are good candidates make in their applications.
Yeah, I'd echo that completely.
Yeah, and that's the message that we give time and time again at the Career Service as well. Really tailor your applications. A generic application will get you not very far.
But also, just to be clear, it does take a while, and there are so many applications, and they come in, and they are a lot of really, really strong applications that come in. So do try not to be too disheartened by rejection, which does come, and it's often not because you're not a good candidate. It's just that there are many, many candidates, so you just have to stand out.
Thank you. Right, this is a question about having a PhD. Would having a literature-based PhD count as equivalent work experience? I'm worried that I'll be behind those who have worked in the industry immediately post-undergrad. Would a PhD in literature give you enough literary knowledge, do you think?
I think it would give you some great literary knowledge, and it would give you, in a way, once you're in the industry, it will give you a real point of difference. I'm not sure it necessarily leapfrogs experience elsewhere in the business. It kind of depends on the particular role that you'd be going for, I think, and how much that in-depth knowledge matters. I think in an entry-level role in a trade job, it wouldn't necessarily give you an edge over a couple of years experience. but perhaps 2 years down the line, it would give you an edge in a very particular sort of role. So that's a bit of a hedging answer, sorry.
I mean, I'd say again, from my perspective, obviously so many transferable skills that doing a PhD gives you that you don't necessarily think about straight off. And obviously you haven't just done a PhD, you will also have been engaging in, you know, writing things with other people and organising conferences or seminars and so forth, or probably teaching, or engaging with peer review, or trying to get your own things published, etc. And all of those things obviously are invaluable in working within the publishing industry in general. And so, yeah, trying to sort of play those up, and time management and project management and so forth, and working with people. So all of those things are extremely valuable, and you can probably evidence them with other activities that you've done alongside your PhD. So being quite savvy in how you are evidencing those sorts of skills in your applications would definitely be important.
Thank you. Interesting one coming up. Is there a risk in applying to many different kinds of role, editorial, marketing, literary, fiction, commercial fiction, at the same publisher? Will this appear dishonest? Will they even know, actually, if you're applying to lots of different kinds of roles?
I think for an entry-level role, I'd say it's absolutely fine. I think if I saw that someone, I don't think that we would necessarily see that as hiring managers anyway, but even if I did, I would completely understand why someone was doing that. And I think as long as their cover letter really communicated why they were interested in the role that they're applying for in that moment, and talking about the specific imprint or publishing house that they're applying to, I don't think it'd be off-putting in any way, personally.
I think it's rare that it would be clear to a hiring manager, to be honest, how many other jobs you'd applied for. And I think everyone knows that if you're trying to get a job in publishing, you might well be scouting out lots of different roles. So I don't think there's anything to be afraid of in doing that. But don't apply for a sales role and say, I'm delighted to be applying for this job in editorial, because that really will get somebody's back up.
Thank you. There's a journalism question here. Does work experience need to be recent? I did some journalism work experience during undergrad, but that was about 5 years ago now, as I'm a PhD student.
I think the fact that you've done work experience will help. It depends how the rest of your application looks. If your CV is brilliant, if you come across really lively, then it just all adds to the package. I think recent is good, but anything you can show to about the skills that you attained during that work experience, what you learned from it, just basically you just have to it's like anything, you just sell it as best that you can. That's it. Any work experience has to be good.
Thank you. Oh, here's a nice one. How do you find the publishing industry in terms of career progression?
Well, I'll take that and say I don't think it's easy. I think it takes its time, but it's possible. Publishing has a bad reputation for being a pyramid structure, and it is to an extent. It's often difficult to get promoted until there's a role available above you. But I think that is similar in many industries. And I think you kind of can't let that dissuade you in some ways, because if you're successful and you're succeeding in what you're doing, there will be other jobs. I think sometimes people feel like they get into one company and the only way up is to progress within that company. And that does work for some people, but actually taking a sideways move to get different experience and then coming back in at a higher level can be really profitable. Equally, moving between different divisions, I think you have to think a little bit more creatively. You can't assume that you go into a company and then you will gradually get promoted. It's not like a civil service job where there's a real kind of clear structure. You do have to advocate for yourself a little bit, sometimes move around, apply for new jobs. So there isn't an easy structure upwards, but it is possible to do it. And if you're successful in your role and you're savvy about the moves that you make, and you keep abreast of your own network, I think it's absolutely possible to progress.
I think also it's really important to reach out to people who can be potential mentors to you, who can, especially in the business, who can show you, talk to you about their route and get tips from them and have an idea of where you want to go, and reach out to those people who basically have the job that you'd want one day for yourself. I think it's thinking ahead. I mean, often it depends what you're good at. Some of us aren't always great at thinking, where do I want to be in 5, 10, whatever years time, but having an idea of where you see yourself and definitely reaching out. Most people now, I mean, people are very busy, but I think definitely once you're in a business, if you reach out to people, they will, go and have a coffee with you or give you some advice. So just reaching out to other people, I think, who are basically where you want to be, can be really helpful.
Thank you. There's one here about referring to something that somebody said earlier, that editorial roles don't involve as much reading as people hope. But once you start to progress, might there be a fair amount of reading involved?
I'd say that there definitely is a lot of reading involved. It's just that isn't what the everyday necessarily looks like. It's certainly an important part of the job. As I say, I look after 20 books a year. All of those I have to read, but there's just a lot more to the job than just that. And it can depend. Different editorial roles in different companies look different. So there are kind of project editor roles that involve a lot more hands-on work with the manuscript, doing things like copy editing or working with external copy editors. In a role like mine, it's more about the kind of initial structural edits and content edits rather than the really nitty-gritty editing. But certainly reading is important to, I'd say, every publishing job, both reading the books that you're working on, but also reading, finding out what other companies are doing too.
Everyone concur with that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it remains a hugely important part of the job. I think some of us are always disappointed that we end up kind of squeezing it in at the end of the day or on our commute, being the time when I'm getting my reading done, rather than being able to sit down on the sofa and read for half a day. I long for that day, but sadly that's not really that's not really feasible.
Right, it seems we've got quite a few people in the room doing a research degree. For editing assistant roles, what kind of skills might be transferred from a research degree for that role?
I'm going to admit that I don't know a huge amount about research roles, but I would say that research skills in general are very useful in editorial assistant roles. Often we will give our editorial assistants research projects to do if we're thinking about moving into a new area, for example, a new area of publishing, and maybe publishing for a new audience. There are lots of research projects that editorial assistants can get involved in.
Okay.
And in general, just sort of being able to read a lot of stuff very quickly and understand it and sort of get to grips with very new material. And that's quite it's hard to put into words, but that sort of skill, which a research degree definitely gives you, is extremely important, I'd say, in my job at least.
I'd add, even for journalism as well, there's transferable skills that, tracking down somebody, doing the research on an in-depth investigation. So all these skills are transferable, and it's just about in your covering letter, in your CV, drawing out those skills and focusing on that and how that will help the area that you're targeting.
Yeah, I would add to that the critical thinking that you develop while you're doing research degrees at any level is really important, because it's all about decision making and what's relevant and what isn't when you're doing that research. So think about your research in terms of the component parts of it rather than just its research, and then you'll come out with the skills that are transferable from it. There's an interesting one here about, are you able to move into publishing from another industry if you start out in something else? Can you transfer in to publishing at a later stage?
Yeah, I think so.
We have someone who I knew was working in film before and is coming to journalism. I think you can. I think it's just about if you've got that interest and just showing that you have that interest. There's no kind of bar to where you've come from. It's just literally about focusing on where you want to be and saying that you have that interest and those skills. So you should never let where you started off affect you for really going for it.
There's a lot that you can use from other careers if you've come in from any other part of the media into a publishing job, or from another part of sales into a publishing job, or PR and marketing. There's a lot of things that publishing is almost a microcosm of lots of different sorts of businesses. So you can bring a lot of different things in. And as Jean said, it's about kind of using what you've got from that and seeing how that can be brought into whatever role you're heading for in publishing. But absolutely, there's a lot that you bring that is of value if you come from another career first.
Yeah, the traineeship that I mentioned earlier that Hachette's started has just opened up for career change applicants as well. So it kind of shows that the industry is very open to it.
Thank you. Right, going back to cover letters, that there's a question about what balance should there be in a cover letter, which either focuses on your achievements and qualifications, the balance of basically why you're motivated to want that employer or why that employer should want you. What's the balance would you recommend?
I think I would say I would normally say lead with why you want to work with the company and what your passion is for it. Maybe that's the first paragraph, and then move into what your skills are and what you could bring. So I think you've got to lead with something that that says why you want to work and what your passion is, and then follow that up with the evidence that says how you can back that up, and what you might bring to the company and how you fulfill the role profile or the job spec.
Anyone else want to come in on that one? Okay.
Yeah, said perfectly, I think.
That's fine. Now, I'm not sure if you're going to know the answer to this because none of you are literary agents, so feel free to say you don't know if you don't know. But what advice might you give to a student author who's looking for a literary agent but has no industry connections? Is reaching out to alumni permissible?
I work with a lot of literary agents, and I think it's difficult. I mean, with having no connections shouldn't make a difference to being able to get representation. It is about the quality of your work. The issue is that it takes time because everyone is busy and people are reading through things. It takes a long time to read through everything. But my big advice for that is to do your research on which agents you are approaching. So really think about approaching agents whose books are open, particularly people who are looking to maybe find their next big thing. Don't go for the top person at an agency. Go for somebody who is building their list because they are more actively looking. Go for somebody who has represented books that are similar to what you're writing or what you're interested in writing. Connecting with kind of represented people could be fine, but in a way it won't necessarily help you get representation. I think it's more about being savvy about who you approach to make sure that your work is most likely to get read.
Okay, thank you. We've got quite a few people who seem to be creative writers, and there's a couple of link questions. Is publishing a good industry for someone who's also interested in being a writer? And are there careers in publishing for creative writers? Yeah, they're people who want to be creative writers or who are creative writers and wondering whether there are roles within publishing where they can use that level of creativity, I think.
There's a lot of crossover. I mean, I've worked with journalists who have gone on to be like bestsellers, so that you can do it. I feel that in journalism it's more a case of being creative in how you do your stories, or maybe writing on the side. There's also still magazines that publish fiction, but journalism's quite, I mean, it's quite restricted to that degree. But I know a lot of people who have, alongside their journalism, been creative writers and have published books as well. So it's definitely a good field to be in, but how much of that creativity you can do actually in the job 9 to 5, we have to be quite honest about that. There is parameters, I think.
In trade publishing, I would recommend marketing teams and copywriting teams, where you are able to use your kind of creative writing in writing campaign slogans, working on a campaign, writing copy that might go on the back of a book, or that might be on your side of a bus poster. That they're probably some of the most creative roles in terms of writing. An old former colleague of mine moved from being a marketing manager to, she just became a freelance creative copywriter from there, and now her whole work is in creative writing. So that's quite a nice jumping off point if that's where you want to go, I would say.
Okay, thank you very much. We do have another recording of a previous event about creative writing, which is on our YouTube channel, if you want to go and have a look for that one. So thank you very, very much, everybody. You've been hugely generous with your time, your advice, your tips, your knowledge. And so thank you very, very much for coming along and talking to us tonight.